payroll is way more important than sending people money or presenting a payslip. The reason why I say this is that often when we're just on the inside of things and just heads down doing our work, you forget that that's how people live. Like if you miss a calculation, if you fail to pay someone, if something is wrong, that person may not have enough money to feed their family or pay the mortgage or pay their taxes. It's very easy for you to forget. So it's a lot of responsibility.
Welcome to the Payroll Podcast with your host, Nick Day. Find out what it takes to truly discover what it takes to elevate your career within payroll as we meet with the industry leaders who are shaping the industry for tomorrow.
Hello and welcome back to the Payroll Podcast. My name is Nick Day, CEO at JGA Recruitment Group, and we are specialist global payroll recruiters. Now, today I am super excited because I am welcoming Marcelo Lebre, the COO and co-founder of Remote.com. Now, Marcelo was previously VP of Engineering at Unbabel and has held several CTO positions. He frequently speaks at events about leadership and managing remote teams, and he's also a startup advisor and mentor to entrepreneurs. Now, a passionate engineer, a proud dad like myself, and sci-fi nerd, Marcelo loves building products, scaling architectures, and bringing people together to build extraordinary things. And you're going to find out all about that during this show, because for those not yet familiar with Remote, the business he did co-found in 2019 with CEO Job van der Voort, then you're going to really discover all about these extraordinary things today, because Remote are a business that helps simplify how companies employ global talent. They've done that by opening up the world of work for every person, business, and country. Recently in 2021, following a $150 million funding round, the business was valued at over $1 billion. And the business continues to evolve. And one of these evolutions has seen Remote start to take care of global payroll, benefits, compliance, and taxes. You can see the relevancy here now, guys. We're going to be talking about global payroll, remote workforces, and most importantly, I guess, Remote are a business that continue to help and support companies so they can focus on their most important asset. You guessed it, their people. So without further ado, welcome Marcelo to the Payroll Podcast. How are you feeling today?
Thanks, Nick. Feeling good. Happy to be here.
Fantastic. Well, I'm going to start with my first question. So I'm going to ask all my guests, which is this: what does the word payroll mean to you?
If I had to sum it up in one single word, it's livelihood, like life. Not in the sense of generating it, of course, but supporting it. 99% of the people in the world work for a living, and you need to put food on the table. The only way you can do that is if you are properly paid. And if you get a stable payroll process, that's what it means to me.
Fantastic. Excellent. Now, we know that managing global payroll isn't easy, even for the most experienced of businesses. So I'd love to know a little bit about perhaps some of the pressing issues that you've uncovered, discovered, that multinational organizations are facing at the moment when it comes to global payroll operations.
Yeah. So the one thing that oppressed me in my career from CTO, just an engineer working and dabbing in technology, more into the operational world, was the fact that as we started growing Remote, like from day one, I think even before we started, we had so many customers and demand more than we could meet in terms of offer and service. And this feeling hasn't gone anywhere. We're now 1,000 people all across the world, no single office, in about 70 countries, give or take. We add a new country every few weeks. And the reason why we created Remote was because we wanted to solve something that was fundamentally a massive problem for a lot of companies and a lot of people. Like opportunities were not everywhere. Talent was.
Yeah.
And so essentially you wanted to mix and create an homogeneous band of opportunity around the world. And that can only be done if you balance out the scales, right? If you make sure that everyone has access to everything and that it's not just the central hubs in the main countries, the main cities. And my biggest pain point was realizing that to do this, we had to do everything from the ground up, not using third parties or using other companies as support, mainly EOR companies, employer of record, because we knew that by doing that, we would not be different. We would just be scaling on the back of other incumbent companies. And then you can build a very good, big business, very successful. All of our competitors do that. It's very good. They are very successful businesses. I'm very happy for them and for the people that they help employ around the world, because that's the main mission. But the truth here is that you're not doing anything different. Payroll in itself is probably the same process for the last 100 years, 200 years, 300 years,
Sure.
where you get your money, a note in the end of the back of the envelope. Here's what you did. Here's your money. Now, it became fancier as time progressed. Now you have an email with a payslip, and all your deductions are done automatically through banks and stuff. But it's fundamentally the same thing, right? It is the same almost outdated process. And as you put together all these different countries within one single roof and make it scale and offer this to all people around the world, companies, people, employees, employers, and then you realize that people don't get it. People never get it. And a lot of people we employ in all the countries we employ in, all these 70 countries, when they look at their payslip, they're often not from the country they're working at.
Sure.
And so the first thing that goes through their minds is, what the hell is this? Often is not even, can not be in the same language.
Yeah.
Countries like Portugal, we do 14 months a year. So the first thing is, what? Is this like a different calendar or something? And so you realize that this needs a fundamental rebrand and refurbish, right? The functions are fine, like the way you do it and the way that most countries operate. Some are very efficient, others quite the opposite. Many countries are super manual, super outdated, very troublesome, very bureaucratic. Now, imagine you're a company and you want to employ around the world rather than just hire in San Francisco, New York, London, Paris. You wanna hire across the world. Hire the best person for that job for whatever money you can pay. And this person happens to be in a country you don't really know anything about. And so you come to remote and you can easily employ that person. Now, if we were to pass along all our struggles or the details of creating a payslip for that person, right? So their person on Social Security, I think companies would go crazy immediately.
Yeah.
There's a reason why only a handful of companies are really global. It's because it's a feat on its own. It requires a department, massive departments on its own. Like the biggest multinational global companies, they have massive departments just to handle this. And so what I realized is that I was getting very frustrated, not just as co-founder and CTO, but as a Portuguese person that has to deal and understand what other payslips look like and how it functions. And so I decided to know, I'm a very anxious person. And so either anxiety is a super problem or a superpower. So I decided to make it a superpower, and I pushed it into, no, I'm going to solve this. My main challenge has been fundamentally, how can I help bring about some change and update to the payroll world? How can I make it easier? How can I make someone just landed in a country get registered immediately in Social Security without having to go through whole 12 tribulations from Hercules, right? And we've been doing that with many different kinds of shapes and forms of initiatives, both internal and externally. We work with a lot of entities across the world, governments, associations, and whatnot, to make sure that people realize, because it takes a while for people to realize, oh yeah, actually this doesn't really make sense anymore. Yeah. So it's a slow change. It's a very slow change.
It's interesting. You say it's a slow change, but your growth has been rapid, right? I mean, you've had significant global growth, and you mentioned earlier that a lot of global payroll providers exist out there. I know your background is immersed in tech, which is great, because I think the relationship between technology and payroll is one that's continually evolving, and it's evolving at a pace. And I think it's needed to, as you say, as we start to step away from the manual tasks and move towards more automation and utilizing technology in smarter, more innovative ways. What was the gap then that you first identified, maybe from a tech standpoint? You kind of identified and discussed some of the gaps that led you to launching remote from a payroll perspective. But since taking that launch in only 2019, right, it's been phenomenal how quickly that business has grown. So why do you think that's been so successful? Because you were just saying then it's just going to be a slow mindset shift potentially for people to get to grips with it. But actually, it seems to me from looking at this, the speed that you've grown from 2019, launching, going through the pandemic, and maybe the pandemic's helped you because obviously we've seen a lot of people now starting to work remotely, and maybe that concept change has changed people's perceptions of how things work. But I'd love to know a little bit more about the gap that you identified and I guess the journey that you've been on so far, because it seems to have been a very busy and successful ride so far.
Yeah, you kind of have different points. I'm going to start with the beginning.
Sure.
So the first one is there's a massive need for this. Like, as I said, talent is all around the world and it's not focused on a few cities, right? It's literally 100% distributed. That means that companies often have to do whatever they can to seek the best talent for whatever budget they have. As you said, like a pandemic was a catalyst because it forced not just naysayers, but companies to understand that there's an ROI, significant ROI going remote. And not just that pushed a lot of companies and people to work for remote work and remote workers during the pandemic, but coming out of it or slowly coming out of it, they realize there's no going back and it's a new mainstream, right? And as I said before, it's a massive endeavor to be able to do global payroll on your own. You have to create entities, do all kinds of registrations, licenses, so on and so forth. It has taken us the better part of 3.5 years to set this up for 70 countries. And we just do that. Like, that's the main pain point, let alone now having a business on top of that. So there is a massive need for it. But companies weren't doing it because it was a very big problem. You would either hire contractors or freelancers and then having to deal with misclassification and things like that when you scale appropriately. And then, of course, you can help companies think through it and analyze their approach to it. But you realize that the world is fairer when everyone has the same opportunities, same benefits, the same kind of payslip. Now, my biggest challenge coming into this as a tech person, as an engineer, was that engineers are way too catered for in this world. If I want an API to scan a receipt, welcome me into my office every day, I have. The only thing it's like there's an app for that. There's an API for that. Like, literally, I'm 100% sure whatever I want, there's going to be an API for that. Other engineers built it. In other companies, it's very easy, software. So you can just build it. What I realize is that, I want an API to calculate salaries, to process salaries. Well, there isn't one. Okay, so can I get an API? Can I find an API per country? Well, we have a few, but they're not really up to date. Conditions change every year, taxes. Sure. You don't have it. All right, can I just do the calculations? Not really, but here's an Excel sheet that the local government provides you, and you can get some sense out of it. All right, so what about Social Security? How about deductions? How about taxes? Well, no, you're going to have to do it on your own. What do you mean on my own? Has no one gone through it before? Because the thing with engineers is we're very lazy. I was speaking to myself, for myself at least. I don't want to repeat myself. I don't want to do things twice. I just want to do it once and then reuse it as much as possible. But no. And I was like, so how are companies dealing with it? Well, the problem is that 98% or 99% of the market is local. So there's a bunch of local software that often is crappy. It's so bad. It's so horrible. And so you go through all the pain of having to assimilate this manual software that you often can even integrate with it. And even if you can integrate with, it's fundamentally different from the country, the neighbor country, right? So it's all this that feels like 20 years ago for software engineering, right? And the first thing that I felt was, okay, I'm going to have to build it from the ground up. And I'm going to have to use software that exists because I need to get going. I have a great team of payroll specialists that have more than experience dealing with these tools. And we're going to have to work around it to make sure that we absorb all the pain and our customers don't see it, right? That is the secret sauce, is that to you or to most customers, hopefully it feels like magic, or it feels like, oh, it just a bill shows up, I pay for it, my employees get paid and get their benefits, and that's done. But in the back of it, we're working double time to make sure that, we have a sustainable infrastructure that allows us to scale and to do things faster and more autonomously. But none of this exists. Well, very funny, just one last anecdote. One of our investors early on asked, so what do you need, to make sure that you're successful, and why is this such a struggle, country by country? And I said, because you don't invest in companies that build this kind of stuff, right? And so I think there's a lot of opportunity here as well.
Well, actually, that anecdote leads in perfectly to my next question, really. My own analogy for payroll would be like the domestique in cycling, right? They're silent, but they lead, and then someone else, HR, whatever, will come and take the glory. And you mentioned there, you want that silence. The magic happens if no one's phoning you. That means it's working smoothly, because people only call if their pay is incorrect, and that's when the problem starts. The silence is golden in that respect. One of the things really interesting, you've touched on a few things there. Number one is the enlightenment of the pandemic to realize that these things could be done from remote locations, which is great. And obviously your timing couldn't be better in that regard. And maybe that was part of the timing process, I'm not too sure. But also you mentioned there that your investors right at the end said, well, no one's ever done it before, so you could be the first. Do you think that the pandemic and technology and all these things have kind of collaborated together now to, for the first time, outside looking in from investors, from entrepreneurs, from C-suite level individuals, are they now looking at the function of payroll differently? Have they now starting to appreciate that actually payroll has a real strategic, it's a real strategic asset, has a much more important part to play than just paying employees as it used to be seen, and therefore companies are looking to invest. People like yourself, and let's be honest, with your expertise, you could have probably picked a different business, a different sector to work in and to focus on. But you've chosen payroll here, and not many have done that. But actually, the market opportunities, as you're experiencing, are huge. So I'd love to know from your point of view how you've seen that market shift in both in terms of thoughts and process, and in terms of going from a manual to strategic, really.
When there's a will, there's a way. And I believe that the will came from need, right? A bit upstream to that idiomatic expression. Because up until now, you always had options, right? You were like, oh, I'm either going to employ locally.
Yeah.
Maybe I can pay the best rates or hire the best people, or even have a smaller team just because it's expensive. Or I'm going to hire maybe one contractor here and there to cope with all the things that I need to do. But as the pandemic and this trend that has been, piling up for almost 20 years now on remote work and distributed work kept pushing, now all of a sudden employers have no alternative than to just accept that there's a new reality, that if they don't do it, they're leaving money on the table. They're not hiring the best people. They're not targeting the best business. And that is a need, because now companies were facing and situating themselves between a rock and a hard place, which is, I need to go remote, I need to go global, but I can't do it myself.
Yeah.
Who can help? Like global payroll can help. The theme behind just the payroll aspect of things, because local payroll used to be perceived as, well, it's just the folks that do the math at the end of the month, or that calculate whatever government says that it needs to be calculated and make those deductions. And then the focus is on that. Like, okay, so but now this is a massive important thing that I have here. Why is it the way that it is, and how can I do it better or more distributed? And then people realize, oh, we hyper normalized payroll, because it's been centuries since it's literally very similar processes. And now we realize we're decades behind. It's still the major lever here.
Yeah, it must be hugely exciting. I mean, I'm always trying to champion the profession. It can be such an exciting profession, because especially now technology is involved, it does take a little bit of HR's involved, a little bit of finance. You've got, as you said, the mathematical side. There's now the client-facing side of it, and tech's now really immersing itself in the industry. The one thing that, for the listeners listening out there, listening to this now, that really appealed to me to approach Marcelo, to ask him to be part of the show today, is I read a headline that said that Remote successfully managed to, through their Series C funding round, over $300 million. And for me, it was a real signal of intent that proved the importance of payroll is really starting to be recognized. I don't think we'd have seen a headline like that 10 years ago. I just don't think it was in people's consciousness to think of investing in payroll and payroll technology in the same way. Has it surprised you? Or maybe not, maybe you always knew you'd get that kind of level of investment, but have there been any surprises along the way during this growth phase?
So we knew when you're solving a really big problem, really big pain, there's, of course, a very big business behind it. Now, the thing that I would not be able to say or assume or predict even is how fast it would grow. I knew, like when we started this, that I remember vividly having this, FaceTime call with my co-founder and saying, this is super exciting. This is massive. Are we both sure we want to tackle? Not that we could, we knew we could, but that we want to tackle because it's going to be massive. And I said, when did we ever say no to a challenge? And that was it. And then we started Remote. Before the end of 2019, we already had way more customers that we could serve. Way more. I remember there was a period where we had more than 2 months of backlogged sales calls. Wow. People would get in my DMs to ask for I'm just getting an appointment for 2 months from now. Can I don't know, talk to someone in a few weeks maybe? And because we couldn't hire salespeople fast enough, we had all this demand all of a sudden. And then COVID hit. So it felt more like, surfing a big wave. To us, time wasn't the only thing, the speed of scale was the only thing that hit us so fast. Very happy for it. But it does make you grow up a lot faster.
Interestingly, and maybe it's unique for yourselves in this growth trajectory, but most companies, and I know this as a recruitment expert, I've done this for over 20 years, when you get that level of scalability or sales, shall we say, that the hardest challenge is, as you mentioned, resourcing for it, because most people will look to resource talent locally. Presumably, although you still would have had challenges just due to the speed of that growth, I imagine actually you probably had less pain points potentially, and I'm making an assumption here, than other businesses because of your model, which is actually, we need this talent, but we can hire it anywhere in the world, and we're set up to do that. So tell us a little bit about that journey in terms of you're now up to 1,000 employees, which since 2019 is phenomenal growth.
I have to admit that from all the things that we did, hiring was the easiest part. Okay. For one, we had a great hiring team, 100%, hands down. Best I've ever worked with. But it also helped that due to the visibility of the company and the fact that we're leaders in the market and the space, we're very public, we're very open with what we do. Everything is on public in our handbook, which is handbook.remote.com. Everything we do, our processes, our way of working, it's everything there. We're very fortunate. I remember at some point, roughly around October last year or something, we had around 50,000 applications a month.
Wow.
We often had a problem where someone would post a job ad and had to take it down 2 hours after because we just humanly could not, even if you have the best sourcer, best recruiter, filtering through things, we often had 2-3 people looking at the same job ad list of applicants. Then you have to pass it along, right? And you have to comb through it and make sure you give people a proper chance. And we always made a point of replying to literally everyone without exception, unless it's a problem. And that made it easier, right? Because you had the world to pick from, and a world of talent. And so you get to pick the best people around the world. The kindest, to me, is always a balance of good professionals, good people. I'd rather work with good people and good professionals than, geniuses. So it made it easier to scale in that sense. And of course, we had the culture infrastructure in place to make it happen with asynchronous work, with all the things documented.
Amazing. I know that's obviously with the work that you do, and it's not just payroll, you're helping companies to hire talent in these locations as well. Part of that work did involve Remote undertaking a global workforce revolution report. As you said, very transparent. Some of these reports are all available on the website and links, and I'll share those in the show notes. But within that report, it states that employees today operate under a different set of rules. Their needs and outlooks are changing faster than ever. I wonder if you can tell us a little bit more about some of the report and its findings and what some of those needs and changes are.
Quite a lot. Now, this report is over a year old. We keep updating it, and there's a lot of very interesting stats moving. One of the ones that was like the most important that moved all this was the amount of people that began to demand working remotely. Right?
Yeah,
Yeah.
we're seeing that
All
as
of us
recruiters
have.
as well. By the way, we see that every day for sure.
That's why people call it the Great Resignation. Like even the top paying companies are not paying enough for people to go to the office, to let go of a part of their day or life to commute for minimum of an hour. This was very aggressive. Companies were not ready for it. Companies were used to offer, come into the office, you have ping pong tables and beer and, arcade machines like the one I have in my background and things like that. And that was enough. It wasn't, and the truth was, it revealed itself. It wasn't the reason why people went to the office. They went to the office because they had no other alternative. That was it. Or it wasn't mainstream for them to pick. And for some people, was even a bit of mistrust scenario because, company remote, don't really meet your colleagues. Is this a thing? Is this a scam? Is it getting professionally catfished? And this change was so drastic that all of a sudden you have people taking, 40, 50% pay cuts just to move back to their home countries, to move inland and things like that. In my mind and a bit of research, anecdotal research, to be honest, it only compares to the Industrial Revolution, where people took over. And in the same fashion, like machines took over at the time, and now people are taking over and dictating what they want to do with their own time. And we saw many things. It's like almost a domino play, where then companies have to very fastly adapt. Like, okay, I will support you, but you also want to move to another country? They don't know how to pay people. They have to resort to companies like remote. We're here to make it easy, but what does this mean for the company culture? Now people are abroad. Do I also offer health insurance? Do I have to offer health insurance? Are there any other available benefits that people can and demand? And by the way, I was spending, I don't know, 100K, 200K a year or more in an office. What do I do with that money? What do I do with the lease? What do I do with all the beers in the fridge people didn't take, And then all this started changing and generating real estate changes. People coming out of the center of the cities and moving to places with better quality of life and demanding more from the locations they live in now, like restaurants and shops, and doing a lot of renovating. There were many stores that sell like things like, garden furniture that went completely out of stock because all of a sudden there's so many people enjoying the sun and working outside. These small things that change so much of it, all of a sudden people start taking the control of their relationship. It is not just one-sided where the employer dictates 90% of it, but you start seeing other things like a more balanced salary ranges, more equal opportunities, less discrimination. Because, if you're not in the office and if I'm in a call with my boss and my boss starts to, be an ass, and what I can do is I nod, I close the Zoom call. 20 minutes later, I have a Zoom call on an interview with a new company, right? Like that is fundamentally a huge change. People, going to an interview had to make an excuse sometimes, put on a shirt and then go to the office and people are making fun because you're wearing a shirt, you're going to an interview, stuff like that. All this is now just, assumed as part of life. And if you want to move, you move. And people are demanding for great work conditions, to being treated fairly and equally. And that in itself, without having to talk about, the flexibility of working schedules or unlimited time off and diversity and whatnot, all this, it's like a domino play and it keeps on going. And I think it will keep on going for a really long while. We're still, I believe, remote work is the first step into the future of work, and it's still unraveling.
Have you ever asked yourself, how can I recruit payroll staff effectively? Please don't give up on your recruitment project just yet. Here at JGA Payroll Recruitment, we appreciate the difficulties associated with attracting, recruiting, and retaining top payroll talent. We also understand just how costly a poor payroll hire can be. JGA Recruitment are a niche payroll recruitment agency who will partner with you to resource payroll candidates who will improve both the accuracy and efficiency of your payroll department. Contact us today on 01727 800 377 or visit jgarecruitment.com to find out more.
Yeah, I agree with you. I mean, in recruitment, the Great Resignation, we tend to term it the Great Awakening, because it's being led by employees saying, actually, I don't need to put up with this, or there's other opportunities, or I value my work-life balance better, whatever that awakening, enlightenment moment is. And yeah, absolutely, it's still certainly continuing. I really enjoyed your insights there, Marcelo. I'm glad you shared them with me. I'm going to bring it back to payroll just for a minute. So I want to make sure that people listening are really clear on the offering that Remote give. And now you may be able to tell me there's more than two, but typically in my experience, payroll providers usually in the global world take one of two forms. You're either a partner-dependent global payroll service, or you're an owned entity global payroll service. But I wondered, I'm assuming I'm correct in that assumption, I wonder if you could just tell me a little bit about each type of payroll provider option that might be out there, and potentially the advantages and pitfalls of each, or in particular, of course, the solution that the Remote provide.
Yeah, so we provide both as well as support contractors. So essentially, a company can just manage the whole workforce with us and payroll as well, in all aspects of it, indeed. So the biggest change is that if you want to hand over everything, you can just hand over everything. Like, you come to Remote, you hire the people, go through the platform, just invite them, they go through an onboarding, and we make it happen, right? You pay a bill at the end of the month.
Sure.
You see like a detailed extract of, all right, I paid $10,000 in salaries and 200 was in benefits. So like a breakdown of all the things. There's one side, right? You don't have to care anything about anything else, and that is it. And then you have typically companies where they think, well, but I have such a big workforce in this country that I don't really want to pipe all my business or business management aspects of payroll and taxes through a company like Remote, because I think I get benefits, tax benefits, for instance, locally if I do it, or for whatever reason, even economical reasons as well. So what companies do, like, of course, usually this happens with big companies where they or have a very forceful reason to open an entity. They go to a country, they create a company structure there with all the work that it entails. And they, all of a sudden, what they realize is, of course, now I can employ people, great. I can draft a contract, a working contract myself, but now I need someone to process this. I need someone to register people in Social Security or do the calculations so I can pay them. And in that sense, it's almost a difference between autopilot and I'm going to take the wheel, but the car still does the pedals, right? It's roughly the same. And, to us, offering these two options, it is still revealing how much work in product, in automation, in infrastructure you have to put in, because even the existing incumbent solutions are super outdated, right? Are not ready, even for the companies that are adventurous and financially savvy enough to set up their own entities and just go for like local payroll. Even that is not sufficient, right? Even the most evolved, there's maybe 1 to 2 countries in the world that have good enough software solutions that do this, but the rest not really.
Jumping on the back of what you've just mentioned there, you mentioned as well earlier in the show that you're in 70 countries now, just over 70 countries. If I'm a company that has employees spread across the globe, maybe some of those are in countries that you're not currently involved with at the minute. It's going to be a two-part question, really. One is, what would be your answer to that company if it is an entity in the region you're not involved in? But also, the long-term goal of Remote, is your long-term ambition to be in every single country? Because to my mind, and I may be incorrect when I say this out there, I don't think there's any global supplier yet that it's truly in every single country. Maybe Remote will be the first, if that's your ambition. I'd love to know a little bit more about the countries perhaps you're not involved in, because in my experience, and I can name lots of different global payroll providers, they do a very good service in the big countries, the UK, US, the ones that are established where huge numbers of employees will be based. But actually, when you deal with those that are based in, somewhere in Africa or somewhere further afield, actually they don't have the same capability. And I understand that because the investment to get to that level of capability may not always be worthwhile. So I'd love to know a little bit more about the ambitions of remote, and in particular, if I'm a client that has one of those long-tail country employees, what would be your reaction to that?
So I'm going to reverse the question. So answering the last one first. Out of principle, yes. We want to cover the whole world as part of our roadmap, which is also live at countries.remote.com. And that's a simple answer, right? In principle, yes.
Yeah.
Now, of course, in terms of ROI, some countries out of 70 are really long tail. That means our operation there is not even compared, like the size of the operations doesn't compare to the top 30 countries. But it out of matter of a principle and ability to expand and to build upon a global framework, that is very much mission, right? So non-debatable, may take longer or faster depending on the country or the need for it, but will be around the world. Now, going to the first question, that happens actually quite often. Customers come to us, and most of the cases we really offer what they're looking for within the 70 countries. At early days, not really. They came to us, and we were always only like 10 countries, so they always had that one-off. And the feeling is they want to have it in one single platform, right? Yeah. They don't want to expand into multiple providers and something that gives them a lot more work. Now, they have two options always. One is we don't want to go through the way of just partnering up. It's not part of our ethos, and honestly, to propagate what already existed in the world, which was bad, honestly, you're going to take a huge long time to come back to your customers every time there's a problem. Yeah. You're not an expert. You're just relaying answers. You're leaving a huge margin, a lot of money on the table, and you're supporting other businesses and wasting time not really focusing on what your mission is. And so to us, it wasn't core. It still isn't core, and we don't really believe in that. If ever we have to do it for any reason, well, of course we'll do it if fundamentally forced to, but it is not our first, second, or third options. And you have two choices. One is you either work with remote and another partner. We have a lot of businesses that do this out of principle, and then typically migrate everything back to remote until we're covering all those countries. Or you literally just hire a contractor. So that's what we've seen so far.
And of course, you have that capability to hire contractors very easily based on the work that you do in the business you do. A couple of questions just left. And one thing for listeners to hold on to, I am going to ask Marcelo in just a moment to tell us a little bit about the Remote for Good and Remote for Refugees campaigns, which I think are really interesting to talk about. Before we do, just going to keep the last question related to payroll, really, which is, I wonder if you could just give our listeners some best practices for global payroll for them to consider. Whether they have it in-house, whether they do use an external partner. Are there some trends or some tips that you've seen along your journey getting to where you are now that would actually be really beneficial for them to take away to really help improve their own global payroll process?
Payroll is way more important than sending people money or presenting a payslip. The reason why I say this is that often when we're just on the inside of things and just heads down doing our work, you forget that that's how people live. Like if you miss a calculation, if you fail to pay someone, if something is wrong, that person may not have enough money to feed their family or pay the mortgage or pay their taxes. It's very easy for you to forget. Very early days of remote, we were so busy trying to handle all the new business that someone would send an inquiry saying, why is my payslip like this? And you're like, oh, this is a question, we will get to it. And then you would take like a week to answer, sometimes 2 weeks to answer, because it's just a question. You just want to, the person just wants to know what a payslip means. But you forget that there's a lot of anxiety on the other end. And when you're talking about money, it is one of the things that triggers people's anxiety the most. So it's a lot of responsibility. And I've always felt that it was super important for people handling this kind of business to really, for one, dog food, and second, fill in the shoes. Put yourself on the other side. That is the most important lesson I've learned. Let go of your assumptions, because this new world of distributed work, remote work, demands quite a different level of dedication or even excellence.
Yeah. No, I think that's a very articulate way of putting it. And actually, I'm a fan of psychology. There's a theory there that the things that trigger you, one way to try and react to those triggers is just before you react is to say, what would I do if I was them? And that's with all the learnings, the education, the economic profiling, everything else. If I was that individual that's triggered me, who sent me this inquiry, before I react to it, what would I have written if I was them? And I think you've articulated that very well. And I think you've really brought it back to the essence of what payroll is really all about and the impact it can have on individuals. So a fantastic response there, Marcelo. Thanks for sharing that with us. Last question before we jump into the good stuff Remote are doing here. And I have to ask you, being an entrepreneur, being involved in startups and technology, and now the world of global payroll and remote workforces, all these things, the future of work, which is so exciting. What do you think the future of payroll looks like? I was going to say 5 years from now. Maybe that's too far in the distant future. I'll let you pick the time frame. But what does the future of payroll look like to you?
Self-service. To me, it has to be self-service. In our journey building remote, one of the things is clear on a day-to-day. The payroll specialists, the operational people, they have a center stage in all of this. So it's not enough that they just do their work and then hand over. But it's important that whatever product you're building is built around them as well. So it's not just around your customers, your employees, the people you employ through your platform, but it's around these professionals as well. I like to think of it, geek as I am, that's like an Iron Man suit. The payroll specialist has way more impact based on their own knowledge of the matter, because they're the subject matter experts, than, just punching a few numbers into a platform and extracting something out of it. Way more. That most people think, well, payroll specialists sit in front of a computer with a crappy old software and they punch a few numbers in and something comes out in Excel sheets and whatnot. It's a tiny bit. It's like you judging a surgeon by the scalpel. It's just the tip of the iceberg. And so it has been super important that all these tools around these people elevate them so that they can spend their time in the things that really, really matter, right? In making sure that we provide the comfort and the know-how, not just to the employees, but the employers, that often they really get fidgety and they want to know and they want to be certain. And you have to hold their hand and say, well, we got this. And not like, yeah, I put the numbers, payslip is this, bye, talk to you later.
Sure.
That's not it. And so there's a lot of opportunity, I feel, that for all these tools, payslip calculations and stuff, to become more self-serve so that the specialists can really be specialists. They're not just, number punching people. And that's what I feel has to be the biggest change in this space.
Excellent. Fantastic. Now, of course, right in my introduction, I said one of the key missions, if you like, for remote is to allow companies to focus on their most important asset, which is their people. Now, it's worth me mentioning here, because not all businesses do this, right? So when a business does do something good, I think it's worth shouting about. You've got a couple of programs that the remote are running at the minute. One is Remote for Good. One is Remote for Refugees. I'm going to put links to both of these in the show notes. So if anyone's interested in finding out more, please do go and have a look. There's a remote.com/social purpose and remote.com/remote for refugees. But I wonder if you could just bring those two programs to life for the listeners to tell us a little bit more about the culture as well, I think, behind the brand.
Yeah. This new trend, this new revolution of work pushed everyone and everything.
Yeah.
But within this, there's either opportunities that are not fulfilled or organizations that are not served because they don't have the capacity to buy these solutions, right? It's not cheap. It is essential, it's fundamental, but it's not cheap. Like, you still consider it something you have to pay for. So at the end of the day, organizations also have to go remote. We saw so many opportunities going around the world of people wanting to go work for nonprofit organizations and entities that just work in social care and things like that. With great power comes great responsibility. And how can't you not help, right? And so, as I said, remote work is just the beginning, the first step into the future of work. We have an infrastructure that we built through a lot of work that can support a lot of people in need across the world and the organizations that help these people as well. So we help both ends. So through organizations that can, nonprofit usually, that can just reach out and we'll help them do it. And remote for refugees, where companies can employ refugees through us at no cost. We take care of all the management fees and you just pay salaries and that's it. And we've done a lot of work. Like, these initiatives are not just, coupons. They entail a lot of work from a big team to support, to help, to advise. These people are often forcefully displaced. They land in a new country. They don't speak the language. They can't register themselves in whatever entity they're forced to register themselves. So we help them do this. We help the companies go through it. We help the organizations go through it as well, and all of them to understand what are their options. We have a great mobility team as well that helps people migrate to another country, check first whether they are eligible, and work with the local entities to make sure that everything is taken care of. And very importantly, we work with a lot of different governments across the world that reach out to us to, for one, understand what is the impact of remote work in government management. I'm delighted to be able to help push this forward. But secondly, pave the way for remote work. So we're essentially also doing a lot of work for our competitors, not just us. But I'm happy to do it in any case, shape, or form, because we all win. Right? The mission doesn't change just because others all are benefiting, because the people are who benefit the most. And that is the most important part.
Well, it's incredibly commendable. I think I mentioned to your colleague before getting onto the show, Marcelo, we're going to share the Remote for Refugees link in our newsletters at JJ Recruitment as well, and try and share that message. I think it's fantastic work that you're doing. So I hope that brings a little bit more traction and a little bit more visibility to the charitable project, which I think is great.
Entering the vault.
Last but not least, before we close the show, we're just going to open the vault. So 3 short, sharp questions for you, just to keep the listeners guessing in the last bit here. So the first one is this: one piece of advice you would give to someone working in payroll right now.
Look forward, don't look back. If you start like this work now, or if you've been here for a while, this business area is filled with preconceptions, with things that don't change, that haven't changed. Keep asking why.
Perfect. If you had the power of foresight and you could change the entire global payroll industry with one action or improvement, and I might know what this is, what action or improvement would that be?
Oh, wow. I would make it exactly the same across the world. All processes for payroll, Social Security, deductions. I would make it like one fell swoop, all the same across the world.
Perfect. Makes everyone's lives a little bit easier. And last but not least, a bit of fun. If payroll was a song or a movie, and I know you've quoted a couple of movies during today's show as well, what song would it be, or movie would it be, and why?
If payroll was a movie or a song, oh my God, I have to pick a good one.
You've quoted 2 superheroes, I think, during the course of the episode. We had Iron Man, I think it was Spider-Man, I think was the second quote.
I would say Avengers Endgame. For the geeks that know it, the final battle is literally fighting everything at the same time, handling everything at the same time, trying to save the world and doing everything, against time passing. So I'd say some days it feels very much like it. You have to save the good guys, fight the evil ones, and put a smile on your face at the same time. So.
Amazing. I think you put a smile on a few payroller's faces, that response as well, Marcelo. Avengers Assemble, I think. It's a brilliant way to close the show. Listen, Marcelo Lebre, thank you so much for joining me today on the Payroll Podcast. Of course, for those interested in finding out more, please do go to remote.com. Please do check out those amazing 2 programs we've just discussed. There's also a partnership program on there as well. All of those links are direct in the show notes, so nowhere need to go. Just click on the show notes from this episode and you can go straight through to that. There's also some amazing blogs and content and resources to find at remote.com as well. So whether you're interested in working with them or not, it's worth visiting the site just to access some of those tools. And of course, if you are a payroll leader listening to this podcast, you have a global payroll related vacancy that you need some specialist recruitment support with, please do get in touch with either myself or any of my wonderful team at jgarecruitment.com. And that link will also be in the show notes. So just leaves me to say a huge thank you again to Marcelo for joining me today. Thank you to all of you for listening to the show. I look forward to bringing you the next episode of the Payroll Podcast real soon. Thank you very much. Thank you, Marcelo.
Thank you. Awesome.
Thank you so much for tuning into the Payroll Podcast with Nick Day of JGA Recruitment. If you need help with a current payroll vacancy, then please get in touch with Nick and his team. All contact details can be found in the episode notes. In the meantime, to make sure you never miss a future episode, please subscribe to the show through any of your favorite podcast channels. Till next time.